What's up, Internet? Welcome to Conversations. I'm your host, Agustin Sanchez, founder of the Photographic Journal. In conversation this week, we have Federica Belli, a fine art and commercial photographer hailing from Italy. Winner of Season 3 of Sky Art's Master of Photography, her work runs the gamut between surrealist vision and rose-colored documentarian. Federica, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's still wild to me that we can connect from basically halfway around the world and see and talk to each other in basically real time.
Right. In this moment, even more than usual. It seems also absurd.
Yeah, it's quite a dichotomy with everything that's going on. How has COVID-19 sort of affected you over the past couple of months?
Well, life completely changed. I mean, it's quite a broad question, actually. I mean, turning to the university situation, it's complicated because there are no more classes, everything is online, and professors are struggling as much as we are as students. So I'm studying economics, I'm in my last year. And what I'm doing about that is focusing on preparing my thesis. So I'm trying to take advantage of the free time I have, and also trying to keep in contact with all the teachers and all my classmates. Regarding photography, actually, I've never taken so many pictures. And I guess it's an interesting point of view because these are times when we really notice what matters for ourselves. It's the first time since the beginning of social medias where fear of missing out is not really a thing. You know, everyone is just sitting on their own couch as you are. So the question every day becomes, what brings me joy? What is it that I want to achieve in life? What is it that I have to say, even now that no one is listening? So I'm basically saying it to myself. What is it that matters so much to me that I still want to say it, even when no one is listening? And then, of course, through social media, people are actually listening somehow, but it's not the same. Everything comes back to what brings us joy. And the fact that photography is so present these days, I think it's an interesting thought.
No, I think that's a really good way to frame it. I've been kind of thinking about it as whatever brings you comfort. I think joy is a perfect analog for that. I think that everything is so disjointed or different than the way that we might have experienced the rest of our lives in some ways, that it's about the small moments and doing the things that you can still do that bring you joy, that sort of get you through the day.
No, definitely. Then, of course, you have to consider that there's also really no time frame at all. We keep postponing the day when we will start interacting again. And though being well aware that we are among the lucky ones, I mean, we are healthy, we are talking together, and we are home, still life has changed. And the way that photography and art in general are evolving and adapting to it, I think that's really interesting. So here in Italy, we have this, especially in the early days of the stay-at-home period, there were people singing and having jam sessions on their balconies. And these videos went viral because for once there was content and it was not form. It was not just geometrical beauty, which I think is really important in photography, of course. But it brought to my attention how important it is, the human connection, having something to say like that. The message, the human connection is what matters for art and for photography as well. So I think in this period more than ever.
It's interesting because I think that there is that interactivity when you're putting out something on social media. People are looking at it and reacting to it and leaving comments and liking it, but you can't see its effects immediately. Whereas with, somebody having, we're all stuck in, if you live in an apartment and you all have condos or a balcony on the back, it's easy to have, somebody has a saxophone, the other one has a piano, you all got on the balcony and you can kind of have fun and you can visually see some of that interactivity And in the midst of what's going on, where I think a lot of people feel very isolated, um, I'm lucky to have a daughter and a wife that I'm sort of isolated with. So I do have that human connection and touch, but there are, millions of people that are isolated alone. I have a couple friends that literally haven't touched a person for over a month. And it's a very sort of, it's just a very depressing time.
Definitely, definitely. I think this situation is really bringing out differences among possibilities people have. I'm talking about also economic possibilities and their social
Mm-hmm.
situation. I mean, last night I was talking with my mom. I'm stuck at home with my parents, which is a great situation. I mean, and I also happen to live in the countryside, which is a great luck right now. And we were joking about how, I mean, think about those couples that were considering splitting up and they are stuck together for 2 months. I mean, there are really weird
Yeah.
situations out there. And I'm of course, I'm excluding like
There,
abuse and everything, but like trying to think of the funny side. I mean, it can be intense.
it's definitely, I think that there's, I mean, the possibilities of the things that are going on, it runs the gamut. There's things that are happening where couples maybe that were splitting up are reconnecting and finding new love, and there's others that, like you said, it's the worst possible thing that could probably
Yeah.
be happening for them. You said that you're with your parents in the countryside where you had grown up. Does that offer, I guess, different opportunities? I'm not in I'm outside of Miami, so I'm in the burbs, and I probably have a little bit more freedom than say somebody in New York City or San Francisco, just because the population density is lower. Are there opportunities that you've been able to find for photography in this time?
Well, yeah, as usual, I think that possibilities for photography come where there's a possibility to reflect on what life is offering you in general. So, what was considered to be lucky in, like, let's say 3 months ago, like living in the center of Milan or having the possibility to live in the huge cities, that was considered something for lucky people. And now the perspective has somehow shifted. And whenever there's a shift, I think something really interesting happens. So there's immediately, like, just think of when you move the table in the kitchen to another corner. For like the next 2 or 3 days, it's gonna feel weird, you know? So now coming back to the countryside, and it feels like, wow, now I'm really lucky because I have these flowers and there are birds outside. I can have a walk without uh, doing anything illegal. That becomes something you appreciate more. So it sort of made me think of how this could be. I mean, I would still have the choice to come back, but this might be the last time I actually live with my parents for so long. So
Right. No,
this
it makes
is
sense.
really bringing me back to appreciating the value of these two people and the house they built for ourselves. So last night I was standing outside a window, and you know how romantic it is to look inside a house from the outside. And at a point I was like lost in my thoughts, and I noticed that I had a tear going down my cheeks, and I was like, wow, this, like, 20 years from now probably everything will be changed. And I definitely want to have proof of how I love my parents, how they love me, and how weird in like intimate relations can be. Because
Hmm.
this is literally the purest form of love I've ever experienced. And still, there might be 3 or 4 hours where you don't even talk. You know, like living together shows you how love can have completely different forms. And I think photography is a great tool to explore that.
That's really interesting. I love that the romantic way that you're looking at your present situation. I think that um, to a lot of the people probably listening to this, it could be inspiring, because I think that it's easy to, with anxiety or with being stressed out about the current situation, I think it's easy to be negative. And I think that focusing on the positive and focusing on what you have and appreciating the time that you have because of what's going on it's a beautiful sentiment. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, yeah, I think that getting to the positive takes a lot of hours spent in the negative. I mean, this situation is obviously having us all looking at a screen in complete anxiety and having no idea what's going to happen in a month or two. And you're
Mm-hmm.
there stuck with your laptop and you're like, how can I be productive? And then there's the other voice in the back of your mind, and it's like, you don't really have to be productive. Just try to comfort yourself. But then there's that other voice, and it's like, yeah, but I'm stuck and I have to do stuff. It's just like a lot of chit chat with yourself, which becomes the only chit chat you're allowed right now. So I think it's really important to have conversations with yourself in this time.
So you were said that you're finishing up your last year of university, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're working on your thesis. Has the current situation changed the thesis that you were working on? Have you shifted anything because of it, or are you just doubling down on what you'd already thought about?
It's interesting that you ask this because it actually changed completely. I wouldn't say it's because of the virus itself,
Mm-hmm.
but right before this lockdown, let's say, I enrolled in an optional course which has been existing only for 2 years in my university, and it's called Climate Change Economics.
Interesting.
So I just read the name and I thought, might be cool. It might be really boring. Let's try and find out. Turns out that it really changed the way I see everything I do. And it sounds like I'm promoting the course. I swear I'm not. But climate change is like one of those issues where you feel like I've heard so often about it. I'm clearly prepared on the thing. Don't even try and tell me anything else. I don't want to hear it. I'm not closing the water. I want to wash my teeth. Leave me alone. Uh, and then actually, you have someone who's really prepared about it. Try and like communicate what's going on for real.
Mhm.
And it definitely shifted my perspective. So I'm starting to read books about it. And while I thought I would have my thesis on the importance of art as a marketing tool, how important it is to convey the philosophy of a brand and blah, 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 I realized that it's something that, one, it has already been done over and over and over. And
Mhm.
two, I'm more into communicating feelings and like weird situations and stuff like that. I'm not really into product photography yet. I'm not saying I will
Mhm.
never be, but I'm not yet. So I figured it would be, it would probably make less sense. So since I'm really passionate about the economics behind climate change, who gains from it, who loses from it, I'm now focusing on GDP and how replacing that index with another one which gives more importance to the sustainability of resources and the wages that workers are getting, how shifting that index might shift the policies behind it. So, like, shifting what we measure shifts
Mhm.
what is important for us. What is important for us, basically.
So it's measuring the health of uh, global economics by a different measure. Instead of using GDP as the measure, you would be looking at how fairly people are being treated, as well as how, I guess, responsibly to the environment a country as a whole is
Right.
taking things. Yeah, no,
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. That's very, very interesting. So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, well, just as I was trying to explain it before to my mom. So, like shifting from the GDP measures the output, like the physical
Mhm.
output of a country. So it's like the more I produce, better off people will be. And then you realize that, let's say I harvest tomatoes, and once I have 20 tomatoes, I don't really need more. So the fact that I produce 50 and I can't eat them is just going to produce waste in my garage. It's just going to consume my land, and it's just going to take twice the work I have to put in. So it's basically shifting from how many tomatoes do I have to, are the tomatoes good? Do they last long in the fridge? Are they cultivated in a way that I can have more next year? So it's more of a comprehensive point of view. It's theoretical, of course, but
Of course, but all of it. I mean, even GDP as it stands right now is theoretical to
yeah.
some degree. It's just a measure of whatever's already going on, and how to, I guess, consume or measure and compare the health of whatever's going on. This is probably for a different podcast, but I still find it interesting.
Yeah.
So that kind of thinking, the way that you're approaching these problems, have you found that your studies in economics have influenced your methodologies for photography, or the way that you've come up with ideas and how you approach a problem?
Well, definitely yes. First of all, I think that studying at university is a great step for photography, art, or whatever sort of research one wants to do. Because if you come to think of it as a project that you want to develop, it's really similar to what a researcher has to do. Because at this point, there are so many photographs that I'm slowly moving from trying to take that perfectly built picture, let's say, like geometrically beautiful. I'm trying to shift towards let's try and build a narrative that goes on with time, that it evolves. It shows how we change as people and how maturity plays a role in it. So having to prepare phases, or having to study how history has evolved and changed in the past years, I think, first of all, it gives you a perspective on where we stand in history right now, and how society has a lot of strata that interact and have different possibilities. And also, it forces you to try and build projects, research, then take pictures, then try to put them together and see what's missing. It's almost like a recipe. You try multiple ways. You try to have a taste, see, okay, some salt is missing here. Let's add a bit more color to tell what I'm trying to tell in a more effective way. And then now it's a bit too visual. Let's go back. Let's take some more pictures which sort of move people. But now everything is a bit too far from the eye. Let's try and get closer. Maybe you get a close up. It's sort of like trying to build a puzzle. And it's something I'm experimenting with right now, but I'm seeing that great photographers tend to do that over time. So it sort of progresses from taking one great photo to having a story to tell. And of course, some photographs are going to be less interesting on their own. It's going to be more of a book. You just open it, there's a page, you read it, and you don't really get anything. But in the book, it adds a lot.
I think that makes perfect sense. I know that, in order to tell a story, I think there's a place for a single image that is impactful and beautiful, but I've always been interested in the idea of a series, or something that, whether it's 4 or 20 images, that is collected and put together, that tells a bigger narrative. I think that it's more telling, it's harder to do, and shows more thought. Sometimes, this is probably where a lot of photographers start or are going towards, is you're always searching for that one fantastic image, and then you kind of get hooked to it, and you sort of, it's like you're chewing on the same idea for 5-10 years, and it progresses in really small increments. Right. And I think that's where people get their signature looks. That's where you get a personality that starts coming out in a body of work, where I was talking with a friend the other day and they said, look, I can look through my Instagram and without seeing the icon or the name, if I just see an image, I know that that is Ben's, and I know that this is Masi's, and I know that this is Lou's. It's interesting how effortlessly or without really, I think, trying, personality comes out in a photograph. And it's one of the purest things that I really have fallen in love with what photography is. In that, as you're putting together your work, I know that you have personal work and you have commercial work. Is there a through line that you think that you're trying to already sort of imbue into the work that you're publishing?
Um, well, the thing is that it might be because I'm not really mature as a photographer yet, but I don't really see a huge gap between my personal work and the commercial work. They tend to be really similar as the feeling that comes out of it. Of course, the subject of commercial work is something that is limited, it's fixed and asked for by the client. But I want clients to come to me because they're looking for an inventive idea, and at the same time, that sort of sensibility for certain issues. The main difference is that personal work tends to focus on people which are a bit like sort of isolated and in community at the same time. Often I find myself taking pictures of couples or a parent with his child, and I really enjoy noticing how their bond sort of expands in the area around them. So they can simply be two faces in front of a wall or on some sand, and suddenly it all comes together, and you only see their faces. So that's something that I find really fascinating. But I think that the driving, like the driver, is the same. I think that commercial work and personal work sort of it builds one on top of the other, and it's slowly taking small steps towards who I am meant to be. Not who I want to be, but who I am meant to be. Because I think we're just slowly discovering ourselves, just like onions. It's not like you slowly get to know yourself a bit better.
I think that was perfectly said. I didn't mean to insinuate that your commercial work and your personal work should be different. I actually think it's not because of lack of maturity. I think that for you and the way that you are interacting with the world and the opportunities that you've had through hard work and talent, your work should be sort of even keel between those two worlds. I know that I looked through your website, obviously, before we were starting this conversation, and the series that I think you shot for the New York Times during the parade, where you were focusing on all the people that were on the fire escapes with the blurred foreground, sort of sticks out in my mind of all the I mean, there's other beautiful imagery, don't get me wrong, but when you were talking about the love that sort of emanates from people and seeing the way that the joy that was coming from that group of people reacting to the parade below was such an interesting perspective. So many more people would have probably taken shots of just what was going on in the parade or the people on the ground in front of them. And the fact that you looked up and made conscious choices with how you positioned your frame, your clever use of out of focus and in focus items to draw attention. It was beautiful. It was really inspiring.
Thank you. That was like a really emotional moment, because it was one of the first experiences of, even though I was well aware that that was not my community, like I was definitely not part of it. I had just gotten to New York like 2 weeks before, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't even belong to that community. So I was humbled to have them accept me among them, even though they knew that I was not part of them. they accepted me, and the joy was overflowing. Everyone felt one. So I cried tears of joy, and I felt part of humanity, which I think is the purest feeling in life in general. And in that moment, I also realized that all lessons in life, they come handy when they're needed. So in that moment, I heard the words of one of the great teachers of my life, Oliviero Toscani, and he had told me, if everyone looks one way, just look the other way, and you'll probably find something which is really beautiful. So I saw that I was in the parade, even though, well, I was not supposed to be there probably, but I was in the parade, and everyone was looking towards that. So I just turned to the outside, and I saw all these people on balconies, and they were blasting music, they were colorful, they were wearing makeup in all sort of weird ways. And I think that's how life is meant to be lived. I mean, we often get lost in small uh, problems, or I'm different from him, or like, you know, so what? We are all different, and that was one of the moments where being different felt like being the same, because everyone was different, and that made us really similar. So that was a great moment.
And that makes sense. I think that that's a lot of what the culture of what a pride parade should be. It's not necessarily that you're part of the community in that you are someone that is supporting their right to be who they are and accepting of whatever comes your way. I really think that the idea of inclusiveness and diversity with non-judgment is something that should be celebrated and really supported around the world. And yeah, it doesn't matter that you don't. I think you were included and you should have been there. It isn't a matter of who should and shouldn't be a part of that. And I think that, coming from a small village in Italy and then arriving in New York City, I know that you had lived in Milan, but I'm sure, what was that like? It's a world away in terms of reality and the way that people are interacting with each other.
It is. It definitely is. So that's like when I realized what a huge city is, what a megalopoly we call them. Uh, well, New York is completely different from Milan, and coming from such a small village originally, New York felt more of putting together multiple villages. It was just too much for my mind to realize that that was a unique city. So I was moving among New Yorkers, and it seemed like I was moving from one village to another. As you move from one area to the next one, everything completely changes, and you can almost see that they expanded through time, and they became one. Well, they were not in the past. So my mind still sees New York as an ensemble, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an experience I totally recommend to any young creative or not young or not creative person. Just It's not like that was out of courage or anything. I just closed my eyes, accepted the proposal of Chris Buck, which is the
Mm-hmm.
photographer I work with, and I just closed my eyes. I didn't even think about it, and I was like, yeah, I'm coming, and I will work with you. And then afterwards, all the doubts came in. Okay, I'm going to New York for 2 months alone. I don't know where I'm going to sleep. I don't know whether I will get to know anyone. I don't know whether I will make it out alive. But let me tell you, the moment I stepped on the plane for New York, I felt alive. And the moment I stepped on the plane to go back to Italy, I was another person. I knew that was the experience I was meant to have. And the most important part of the whole experience has been coming back to Italy and taking 1 week off everything just to reflect. on what I had gathered. I think reflecting on experiences is what leads to um, photography, art, or whatever. It's what leads to mature opinions about what you have experienced. I mean, I'm part of that category of people who needs to reflect and ruminate over the situations to get them completely.
I think everyone does, even if they pretend like they don't. I think taking a step back and looking at whatever life has thrown at you, and getting a little bit of perspective, is good. I think modern life can get very wrapped up in go, 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 give me results, next thing,
Yeah.
to see, do, or ingest. And sometimes it's good to just pause. It's good to, as you said, reflect and understand, what just happened. Did you have any, what were like core thoughts that sort of came out of that reflection? What do you think transformed you the most over 2 months in New York?
Well, I think first of all, the fact of being completely alone, meaning that you're not there alone, but then you get to know someone who's going through the same experience as it is when you move to a new city for university, because you naturally get to know people who want to get to know
Mhm.
you. You get to a completely different city and you have to show who you are. You have to have people interested in you. Uh, and that's a different experience. It's a different perspective because it brings you to reflect on, okay, what is it that I have to offer? What is it that I even want to offer? So in the first period, something that I really had to make mine was that life is good, even if it's lived on your own. So it's like remembering how important small beauty and like those small details, like just watching someone step on a boat or seeing the sun move along. It's just time when you are alone moves differently. It's almost like a bubble, I guess.
It's funny. As you reached out to the Photographic Journal and we were setting up sort of doing this podcast, and I remember looking through your work, and the aura that I got from your work as a whole was this sweet, romantic sort of note, and someone that looked at the world with love. Um, and I can kind of be that person at times. And I'm like, I wonder if this is something that I'm making up or I'm sort of putting myself into when I look at it, or if this was the intention. And in our conversation this whole time, it's very apparent that your worldview and the way that, um, how you're filtering and processing what you're looking at is very much what I gathered. It was a very honest reaction to a very honest intent. So I really thank you for that. I think that it's a really beautiful thing. Um, so there's an elephant in the room with that little gushy note. You were on the third season of Masters of Photography, a TV series that runs in Europe. You won that season. That's huge, especially at the age that you're at. I know that you were the youngest contestant that had been on the TV show at the time. Um, I didn't even fully understand. I had already agreed and booked you to chat just based on your work. I had no idea about this little note, which is probably one of the larger notes in your career. Is that how you connected with Chris Buck?
Yes and no. So that's I was well. Let me tell you first of all, winning Master of Photography was something you cannot expect in general, but going there as the
Yeah.
youngest one, I just said bye, I said bye to my grandma. The night before leaving, and I was like, "Oh, come on, don't even bother crying. I'll be back in 5 days." You know, I'll be the first one who goes. So every week, a contestant has to leave. And I was sure, like damn sure, that I was there just to be the young, like Heidi. I don't know if that's a thing in America, but yeah. So the young girl that goes there brings some petals and just throws them in the air and then goes back home, jumping happily. Um, so getting that far and even winning, well, that was unexpected, and that was a magical experience. But
Yeah.
turning to your question, so the year afterwards, for the fourth season, I came back on set to have a report. I took a reportage about the last four contestants of that season,
Hmm.
and Chris Buck was a guest judge for that season. So we immediately connected because I was walking. I had this huge camera. I had, as a sponsor, I had this huge camera. And I was carrying it around, and it was so heavy. And I saw this like 50 years old man coming towards me on a bike. And we were inside a house, and I thought, okay, this man has to be interesting. And and then we just started talking, and we realized that we were both uh, sort of weird and sort of proud of it. So we just got along really well. And it was just a matter of, I don't know, I think the question was there even before we got to speak about work. So it was like, yeah, maybe we should do something together at a point. And then he told me he had interns, and I said, well, you know what? I could totally intern with you. I think that the teachers we accept in life are the people who give us the most. I think that accepting that we still have to learn is the first step in actually learning. So I'm always super enthusiastic to get teachers and to be the student. So I just said, yeah, what, you know what? Why not? I could totally be your intern and bring you coffee in the morning. And he just turned to me and it was like, you do know that I live in New York. I honestly had no idea. I didn't know. But then I looked at him and I was like, yeah, sure, I do. And do you know, I mean, could you really come to New York? And I was like, yeah, of course I could. As if I had all the resources and I had a house and I had my private jet. I just said yes. And I think that's the basis for all the crazy stuff that comes out of life. Just accept, when you underestimate problems, you always end up solving them somehow, unless they're too big. But
Yeah, that's
in
true.
general, I think that being naive is the first step for doing crazy great stuff and living adventures. And that's how it happened. Literally, we were two weird humans who just said yes to each other. So
That's a beautiful story. No, I love that. I love that. I completely agree with you that sometimes if you don't expect something to happen overnight, right? I don't think that you had that conversation with Chris and within 5 days we're in New York. But
no.
actually, what was the timeline for that? Was it a couple months?
No, I guess it was like in January somehow. I mean, we met in January. We started arranging everything, and by March, I had booked a flight for June. So that's,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that
just like,
completely makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
think
I
that
booked my flight before
time,
knowing where I would sleep. Just so, just that's a
but that's
series of
okay.
weird
No,
yes.
no,
Yeah.
I do that. I do that all the time. Like we'll go on a family vacation and we buy the flight because we know I want to go to LA or I want to go to Las Vegas. Um, and so we buy the plane ticket, get that part over with, and then it's like you're almost taking one problem at a time and spreading it out over a few months so that it doesn't actually become a real problem.
Right.
You would get overwhelmed if you were trying to do everything in 2 days.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it comes natural to expect results really quickly. And that's also where most people, I mean, it happens to me, get discouraged. So I thought that let's say now I'm studying Chinese, and I expected that in a month I would get to a point where I could, well, not speak or like sound intelligent, but like have basic conversations. Now it's been 6 months and I can barely write my name. So it's like, just time is the basic ingredient, and I mean, we happen to forget quite often, I think.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, that's interesting. I can't imagine learning Chinese, honestly.
It's funny.
I feel like that's a very hard language to pick up. I have a hard enough time with Spanish, and I live in Miami, so
It's like
your
basically,
English is fantastic. Yeah.
oh well, thank you. But Chinese is more like when you're trying to do crosswords, but you do crosswords. I mean, you generally start doing crosswords with your grandma, who suggests
Hmm.
you the right word, and now you're learning Chinese, and there's no one suggesting. So it's like doing advanced crosswords, sort of. So it's a way to
With a
spend
larger
time.
alphabet, and yeah, no, it's a little crazy. So with your experience with Masters of Photography, how did that prepare you for the real world? How are the challenges that you faced for the TV show? Because I know that sometimes they sort of inflate things. It's more of a pressure cooker than real life might be. Do you see a juxtaposition between the reality of winning the show versus actually facing real work with photography in real life?
Well, Master of Photography has been a great lesson. It's almost like a workshop. So you walk in there, it happens really quickly, and you realize what you might have learned only once 1 or 2 months have passed. In this case, even 1 year. I mean, I think regarding photography, it taught me how important it is to build a project which is varied and conveys a message. So at
Hmm.
times the best picture has to go. You can't put it in there because it's not coherent with the rest of the message, and you just have to accept it. It's for it. I mean, the success of a series depends on accepting that at times the best part of the work has to be excluded. So that was a great lesson in photography. A
Hmm.
second lesson I think has to be mentioned is to listen to advice from people who see your work, even if it's the first time, even more if it's the first time they see it. So you're just showing this series of photographs asking for advice, because there were guest judges every week. A new guest judge would come and advise us with the series we should present to the judges according to their opinion. And while often the contestants would be like, yeah, but you were not there. When I was shooting that picture, you were not there. You don't know what I felt. And that's the way I sensed advice the first time and um, during the first week. So I felt a bit attacked. And in the second week, so the second week is the only one I risked going home. So I was among the two worst
Hmm.
projects. And at that point, while I was waiting to know whether I would still be in the program or I would be the one to go, I realized that, yeah, maybe the guest judge was not there to see what I felt. But I mean, people who see my series have not been there yet as well. So they need to get a sense of the message I'm conveying. The message has to come across clearly and beautifully. So accepting advice is fundamental because you need to be objective. And oftentimes, when you're inside the situation, it's not easy. It's not easy to be objective, you know. So external advice is fundamental.
That makes sense. I think that a lot of this isn't just with photography, but whether it's design or whether it's whatever your original intent was and the emotion that you felt in that moment of creating something, um, it actually doesn't matter. It's more about what it's communicating to people as a whole. I think that the easiest analog is thinking of what a songwriter was thinking of or writing about when they wrote a song that becomes a hit. That song might end up being played at parties and be someone's first dance with the person that they marry, or is something that you your first kiss happens to, and it takes on a completely different meaning and sort of
Right.
perspective. And the original intent actually doesn't matter. It's the fact that it's pure and connects with people that matters more, and that there's inherent beauty to it. It's something that makes a lot of sense. It's more about communication and less about being in that original moment.
Yeah, right, right. And talking about that, I think one point that really came out of the show is also that if you want to be a photographer right now, and these are words of one of the judge that I came to internalize, it's really important to be your own curator somehow. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
still think that curators have to be independent and their opinion is fundamental. At the same time, it's becoming more and more important to have that objective distance from what you're creating, in order to see it as an output and not as your child. I don't know if that makes sense, but having the clarity of seeing the water you're swimming in. So it's like, that story about the two fish swimming one along each other, and they meet this older fish, and it's like, oh, so how's the water today? And then one of the two fish turned to the other one, and it's like, what is he even talking about? So these two fish hadn't even realized they were swimming in water, because they're just too deep into it. So
Right, right, right,
when
right.
you're
No,
just
it makes perfect sense.
creating, it's necessary to have like a distant perspective and being able to sell your own message really well. So that's also where economics and photography merge together, like being able to sell what you're doing. And I'm really good at saying it, but I'm still learning, clearly. So it's like,
It's a constant struggle. I completely understand what you're saying. I think that it's funny. I had another podcast that I recorded with Ollie Sampson, and one of the things that we were talking about was that the work that you're really putting out, you are there's a pre-planning phase where you're going in and you're doing the research, as you said. Then you're going and collecting all of the data and the items that you really want to see. But then the most crucial part is that curation. It's selecting the images, processing them in a way that you think is going to be evocative, choosing the ones that are the ones that stay and the ones that go. And that refilter of you're coming up with a thesis, you're actually going and doing the work, and then putting it through the filter of the experiences through your mind is really what creativity and artistic intent become.
yeah, right, right. And then you get to that final point and you're like, ooh, maybe my thesis was wrong. And you realize that the most interesting pictures are the ones that you shot, just like, I'm not saying they were a mistake, but they just happened in the magic of the moment. So it's like, it just happens. It's a constant exploration of feelings more than a pre-planned objective 2+2. It's more
Yep.
like, okay, let's try to build this set. Okay, stand there, stand there, stand there, and wait. And then there's a butterfly in the corner, and it creates that magic shadow. And you're about to kill that butterfly, and you realize that it's actually the magic in the shot. It just happens. I think photography is pure magic, honestly. Oh God, I'm
And
romantic. Yeah.
no, 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 no. It's good. It's good. I love it. I love the passion. I love the emotion. I think that, I mean, it's what you said. I think that it's okay to have an original thesis, but sometimes you go and you prove yourself wrong in the best way possible, and then you just shift the way that you're thinking. You recompose the lens, right? And that's okay.
Yeah.
It should be an organic thing where we're learning and failing and learning and failing and getting to the, as you put it earlier, the point that we were meant to be, not the one that we planned for.
No, completely, completely. And I think that it's really, it's an intimate process. And that's why photography brings people together as well, in my experience, because just by being together on a shoot, you get so vulnerable and pure. I mean, for a shoot to work, you have to really communicate with the other person, or if it's about self-portraits,
Mm-hmm.
with yourself. So it has to be open. And that's why I think most times when the crew or the cast, or I mean, there are too many people around, it just something feels off. It feels a bit odd. And I was discussing about this also with Chris during with Chris Buck during my internship. There has to be a community of intent. So it has to. I mean, you're there for the picture, you know. As he said yeah, I'm there for the picture and not to make friends. Then if it happens, even better. But it's all about pushing limits and trying to get to the kernel of it. So at times when it's self-portraits, I tend to prefer to be alone because I want to be able to get weird enough with myself to
Mm-hmm.
express that it's something that you wouldn't probably say with words. Otherwise, you would just write a book, you know? And that's where pictures come in handy. So it has to be weird enough and vulnerable enough to go past words. If I can say it to you with words, then I'm probably not going to take a picture of it.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that we all have our strengths, and obviously you're looking for, I mean, it makes sense. You have different mediums that you're trying to communicate things in. And if something is better said with words, you're going to say them with words. If it's better said and it's something that's more abstract, something that is more emotional, or let's say documentarian, you're going to go for whatever's most effective to convey that message.
Yeah, I mean, also if you think of the greatest documentary photographers, I think they are documenting something, but they still manage to go past the article their picture is going with. And I'm not saying that photography is more powerful than words, even though that's what I think. But I think they're just talking to different senses, you know. So at times, a documentary photography conveys maybe the same meaning as the article, but in a subtly different way. There is some interaction which goes on somehow.
I mean, what's interesting to me, and you know, now we're talking about the differences in mediums, and I look at it sort of like photography can have a larger initial impact. It can, you know, kind of punch you in the gut right away. You can look at an image and you get immediate reaction out of it. A book, you're spreading that reaction over 500 pages or multiple
Right.
novels. And each of them has their place and their power where they're able to create new worlds and inspire and draw beauty out of the world. But it's, you know, it's interesting to kind of think of things that way. So with to start wrapping this up, with everything that's going on, did you have projects that you were planning on doing? Are there things that you're most excited to sort of move on to once we actually get through, you know, our isolation? You know, what's next for you?
So I'm excited to go back to raw emotions. And talking about photography, well, there were a lot of projects I was embarking on. You know, when you know you're taking on too many projects. So that was exactly that moment. So it somehow was a needed break. But those projects are being pushed off, and they're probably going to bring me a bit around the world, mostly in Asia. And I'm really excited about that. But that's the commercial part, as we were making the
Mm-hmm.
distinction, you know. And I also think that the influence of the climate change economics course is going to bring me a bit closer to some projects about the beauty of the world that we are losing. So natural resources that are somehow dying slowly and that
Mm-hmm.
we might not be able to capture in 30 to 40 years. So maybe even try to move away from portraits for a while. Not move, but like
Mm-hmm.
trying to integrate them with something else. And yeah, I'm just actually in July, I will be graduating. So I, instead of enrolling in a master, I will probably devote 1 or 2 years to photography full time. Because
Mm.
I think that having this huge opportunity to do what I love in life, I think not doing it would be sort of stupid. So I'm just trying to sense the waters and see if that's what would make me happy, definitely, for at least 1 year or two, Um, and then we will see where it takes us. I'm definitely working on some projects with Sky Arts, and I would also like to, let's say, communicate the lessons that I had the opportunity to get during these years, because I got to know huge masters of photography. I'm talking about real masters of photography. So Oliviero Toscani, Chris Bach, Franco Fontana, Sebastião Salgado. These are all people that I managed to confront myself with daily or weekly or whatever. And
Mhm.
I mean, all the lessons that I learned, I would really like to find a way to divulgate through video or interviews or something. So that's something I'm definitely working on.
That's fantastic. I honestly love the idea of you taking on work that supports your economics thesis and marrying those two worlds where you're using the impact of photography to support the ideas and things that you believe in, as well as letting, I think that everyone owes it to themselves to, if they can, go after their passions and see where it takes them. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. I play the guitar, and when I was 17 going into university, I was like, well, I'm never going to make money with music, but I might as well try. So I went into
Yeah.
a jazz program in the Bay Area where I grew up in San Francisco, and I can't read music at all. It wasn't something that works. I kind of feel my way through music, and it's more emotional for me. It's less precise. So it wasn't something that worked out, but at least I gave myself the
Yeah.
chance to try. And that failing, I
And
think, informed the way that I moved into design and some other things that I ended up loving and being good at. And I still play the guitar all the time. So it never left me. It was just, and I don't mean to think that you're going to fail at all. I actually think it will be the opposite and that you'll prosper in your next steps with photography.
fingers crossed, definitely. But I mean, can you imagine not having tried a guitar? I mean, not going all the way. Then now you would probably be like, yeah, but I love design, but maybe. And now that maybe has an answer. So I think that's great in of itself already.
Yeah, yeah. You can't be risk adverse, or you never want to move on and say, well, I should have. It's just it's a phrase that I don't
Yeah,
want to say. If I should have, then I should have done it, and it shouldn't be
right.
that I
That sounds
regret.
right.
Right.
That definitely sounds right.
Okay, and with that, Federica, thank you so much. Where can people find your work and follow you?
Well, they can totally follow me on Instagram. It's name, surname, photo, so Federica Belli Photo. And my website, which is Federica Belli Photography. And they are mostly updated weekly because I'm terrible with technology. So just so everyone knows, Agustin thought I was still in New York because I hadn't updated my website for like the past 6 months. Uh, that happens all the time, but at times, yeah, that's where stuff can be found.
Okay, great. And they'll be linked in the show notes. And hopefully, maybe we can schedule another podcast in 6 months or a year and follow up with you.
Wow, that would be lovely to see how we both changed.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
yeah,
it
that'd be
changed a
great.
lot.
Yep. Okay, thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Agustin. Bye.
Conversations is available on all major podcast platforms. Like this episode, subscribe and rate us on iTunes. We promise we'll give you a hug if we ever see you in the real world, or at least a high five. Visit us at the Photographic Journal for our latest interviews, photo essays, and features. Want even more? follow us on Instagram at TPJ.